Welcome to the next video in the Discrete Math video series, and here we are going to solve that problem that we left off with in the previous video. And this is not really necessary, but let's assume, or let's create some notation where if I double underline something, then I am asserting that it is the night. And if I single underline something, then I am asserting that it is the spy. And if I don't underline it at all, then I am asserting that it is the knave. And so one other thing that I want to say about what I'm going to show you here is that there is a short and sweet solution to this particular problem, but I would like to at least start by showing you a general method. And it's not an interesting method, it's just kind of a method of exhaustion where you just check every possibility, but at least it shows you how to kind of have a system if you want a system. But after I'm done doing it that way, I'll show you the short and sweet method, but it does kind of require that you sort of like notice things in a kind of unsystematic way. And so some people won't prefer it. So it's up to you how you prefer to solve these sorts of problems. But in my unclever systematic way, let's just start by assuming that A is the knight and see what follows from that. Now, if A is the knight, then A is telling the truth about C being the knave, and so we can write down C. Now, if A is the knight and C is the knave, as we have now established, then that only leaves the possibility that B is the spy. And so we've determined everyone. What we should do is to make sure that now that we know what everyone is under this assumption, is there consistency, right? Are they saying things that they ought to say, given that we know what they are? And so A is saying that C is the knave. Well, there's not really any problem there. Uh, what about B, right? B is now, as we have determined, the spy. Well, the spy could either lie or tell the truth. So looking at what they're actually saying, like in this particular case, B would be lying, but that's consistent with being a spy, so that's fine. And then C is the knave, and C is saying, I am the spy. Well, that's a lie, but actually that's perfect because that just confirms that the knave is doing what the knave is supposed to do, which is to lie. So let's now move on to the next possibility, which is to assume that A is the spy. But if A is the spy, then we really have no idea whether to trust what they're saying or not. And then, well, we just have to kind of have two branching possibilities. And I'm going to pick this somewhat arbitrarily, but I'm just going to move on to B and say, well, if A is the spy, then B could be the knight or the knave, and I'll have like kind of two branching possibilities to represent that. Now, if B is the knight, then we've got A is the spy, B is the knight, and well, or actually, before even talking about that, we can already see that B must be telling the truth about A being the knight. And so right there, we already know that that's not possible because we've already decided that A was the spy. Next, let's consider the other branching possibility that B was the knave. But if B was the knave, then, with A the spy, B the knave, C is the knight. But C would then have to be telling the truth about C being the spy, which is inconsistent, right? That's not possible. And so we get another closing branch. That also is not possible. And so we're done considering the scenario where A is the spy. That seemed to just turn out to be not possible. Okay, and so now let's turn to the possibility that A is the knave. And if A is the knave, then A must be lying about C being the knave. So we must know that C must not be the knave in this scenario. But still, that's not enough to really determine much, so we get two branching possibilities. I'll just turn to B and say that B could either be the knight or it could be the what? Spy, right? Yeah. But okay, so let's start by assuming that B is the knight. But if B is the knight, then B is telling the truth about A being the knight, and that's not possible because we already decided in this scenario that A is the knave. So with that possibility eliminated, let's turn to the possibility that B is the spy. Now that means B could be telling the truth or not telling the truth, but it also means that C is the knight, and yet again we know that C cannot be the knight because then it would have to be telling the truth about being the spy, which contradicts itself. And so we see that only one scenario really survived the elimination, which was the first one that we investigated, where A was the knight, and so on, everything that followed from that. But now let's just see a little, shortcut that would let us get to the same result a little bit faster. And it's from the observation that B cannot be the knight since it would have to be telling the truth about A being the knight. So B's not the knight. Also, C cannot be the knight, as we've already seen a couple times, because then it would be lying about being the spy. So C also cannot be the knight, therefore A has to be the knight. And then from that, you could kind of do the reasoning steps that we've already walked through to get all the other, determinations. So that would have been a much faster, more efficient path through the problem, but you'd have to like you'd have to think to check that kind of a thing. And so anyway, solve it whatever way is your favorite.